I'll start recording so that we can put this up on YouTube. Perfect. So, Matt, you are the author of several books. So I'm just going to read a couple of the titles. So if people aren't familiar, they can go out and pick out your other ones. Lovecraft Country, The Mirage, Bad Monkeys, Set This House in Order, Fool on the Hill, and Sewer, Gas, and Electric, the Public Works Trilogy. Yep. So that's quite impressive. That's a good list of books under your name.
I mean, it's impressive in one way, but I write really slowly compared to most people. So I mean, that's over, 35 years now. So
wow,
I get about one book every 4 or 5 years. But yeah, and after 35 years, I'm finally getting to be kind of an overnight success, and that Lovecraft Country is being filmed as an HBO, or has been filmed and is going to debut as an HBO series in August.
Oh, that's amazing. And you have a podcast too, correct?
Yeah, we did a podcast connected to this,
right.
to 88 Names. And yeah, and for people who are not familiar with the book, let me just give a brief description. So this is set, it's one of those books that doesn't tell you exactly when it's taking place, but you can sort of from clues pick out that it's taking place about 20 years in the future. At a point where virtual reality has finally sort of lived up to its promise. And the protagonist, John Chu, is what's known as a sherpa, which is a paid guide to online role-playing video games. So say you're a busy person with a real life and you want to play like the futuristic version of World of Warcraft, but you don't have hundreds of hours to build up your elf paladin to high enough level that you can do the really cool things in the game. So what you can do is come to John Chu and pay him, and he will provide you with a ready-made character for the game, a group of skilled teammates to come with you, and he will basically cater an adventure in the game for you for a night or for a couple of nights. The novel, basically, he gets a new client who goes by the name of Mr. Jones, who claims to be a wealthy, famous person with powerful enemies, and offers him $100,000 a week for a comprehensive tour of the world of online video gaming, which is one of those deals that seems too good to be true. But as the tour gets underway, like the money's real, so he takes the gig. But then as the job gets underway, Chu begins to suspect that Mr. Jones may actually be Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, who, at least in the book, is still alive 20 years from now. The main thing about it is that most of the action in the first 2/3 of the novel takes place in one or another virtual reality environment where people have total control over how they look and sound. So everyone that John Chu interacts with, not just Mr. Jones, but also his coworkers and even his ex-girlfriend, Darla, are people he's never actually met in real life. So he's constantly forced to guess who he's really dealing with, what they're really like, and what they really want. And that's sort of the basic setup of the novel. This grew out of a lifelong love of gaming, and particularly video gaming. And so I actually came up with this originally as an idea as a TV series pitch. It was part of the same pitch series that initially created the idea for Lovecraft Country. And I decided to try turning it into a novel. And when I first thought of this, it was probably 13, 14 years ago. So at that time, we did not yet all live our lives online. But while I was working on Lovecraft Country and on The Mirage, my previous 2 novels, the internet and Twitter and Facebook sort of took everything over. And we sort of reached a point where now it's like we're all living in an online role-playing game in a sense. So what had started out as a sort of niche gaming idea became something that struck me was much more relatable to ordinary people than it would have been if I'd written it 10 or 15 years ago. So that was sort of how I got down to writing this. So when I finished Lovecraft Country and was thinking about what to do next, I decided to give this a shot and had a great deal of fun writing it. So, and here I am.
So I found it really interesting. This is definitely not my wheelhouse. I don't generally read kind of the sci-fi fantasy. I've done some, but I really enjoyed that I didn't feel like that's what it was. I knew that there was going to be some stuff about virtual reality or maybe some speculative fiction, but when I was reading it, I still was just seeing John Chu as like a normal, you know,
Right.
at first I actually couldn't, I was like, wait, is he talking to these people, or everything's done in VR? Even
Yeah.
talking to his mom is done in VR. And I was like, okay. So, you don't outright state that this is 20 years in the future until there's a reference to the year 2020.
Right.
So for me, I was reading it and seeing, oh, well, this could just be happening right now. Like, I have known a couple friends who are very into, not World of Warcraft, Guild Wars, and a couple of the
Yeah.
other ones that are role playing and multiplayer and all that kind of stuff. So this isn't that far out of the realm of possibility.
I mean, there are a couple of things. Like, yeah, one of the things was I wanted it to be accessible to people, yes, who don't waste huge amounts of time playing video games. I mean, there's obviously that's the, you know, if you like video games, this will definitely be in your thing. But I wanted to make sure that, you know, people who've never played a video game in their lives would still be able to follow what was happening and would still enjoy themselves. So I tried to make sure that, first of all, it was clear at any point what was going on, but that also it's really as much about or more about the relationships between the characters online. And I wanted it to be something that everybody could sort of get into. And yeah, and in that sense, it's the technology is obviously more advanced than the novel. Like if you've ever played around with VR today, it's still very much in the larval stages of what it's going to be. But the issues of dealing with people online where you don't really know necessarily who you're talking to, particularly in a medium like Twitter, where you've got you've got the icon that, like, okay, does this person actually look like this? Is that their real name? Or are they, you know, a Russian bot, or, you know, some kid pretending to be a political activist just to stir up trouble, or what? So yeah, it's a lot of it is just about the kinds of problems generally of operating in an environment where people can sort of take on identities and shed them, and, you know, put on multiple faces at a time. And that's I think more of a timeless thing, and it's a lot more fun to play with. So yeah, that was what was driving it. And I tried to be as matter of fact as possible in the way that John Chu describes his dealings with things, which is why, yes, if you can forget for a while that, oh yeah, this is all taking place in virtual reality, until he does something like conjure up an object out of thin air, and you're like, oh yeah, he's doing this through the computer. So, but yes, if you're in VR, and particularly if it's working really well, you do tend to forget that that's what's going on, or at least you will once you're not wearing a 2-pound brick on your face when you're doing it. So
yeah. Are there people out there who are Sherpas for current games?
I don't know if that particular thing exists yet, though it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the initial inspiration for this, though, was like, as I say, I've been fascinated by games for all of my life, and particularly, you know, video games. But until very recently, I did not have the money to buy the most recent, you know, the most current computer. I was always a generation or two behind in terms of the technology. So when some genius figured out a way to put Dungeons and Dragons on the internet around the turn of the century, I did not have a fast enough internet connection to actually play those games. So I spent a lot of time reading about them instead. And one of the things I found out about through the reading was this thing called gold farming, where, and initially this was people in China, but then folks in the US started doing it too, would basically play computer games that let you, you know, collect loot and, you know, virtual weapons and armor and gold pieces, and they would sell these imaginary items to other players for real money. And part of what makes it so fascinating is this was happening before PayPal. So you'd have people like mailing cashier's checks to people in other states or even other countries and saying, okay, meet me in the game world at such and such a time. You know, here's a couple $100. Meet me in the game world at such and such a time and give me my magic sword or my amazing suit of armor or this big bag of virtual gold. And as often as not, that would work out okay. And so it became this sort of gray market within the game. And game companies had a really hard time with this for a number of reasons. Part of it was people were profiting off their intellectual property without them getting a cut, and that kind of bothered them. But it also created these weird customer service problems. If somebody did get cheated on a deal, they might come to the game company and complain to customer service, and customer service would have to explain, well, these guys are freelancers, they don't work for us. We can't help you. We're sorry you lost your money, but we can't refund you your $200 that you paid for your magic sword. And also, people who are playing a game specifically to get, just to collect goods, play it differently. They act in really obnoxious ways. Like, they're not there to make friends and go on cool adventures. They're just there to collect resources. And particularly in earlier games that allowed you to attack other players and not just kill them, but take their stuff, it created this incentive for these people to come in and basically go around killing other players, rob them of their virtual property, and make money from it. And so this just, this became a real problem. But what was interesting is that it became, you would think people who create this game world have this magical ability to just lay down the law and force people to behave. And it turns out, no. Even if you have that power, people who want to play a game in a particular way, and particularly if there's money involved, are very clever at finding ways to get around the rules and keep doing what they want to do. And all of this just fascinated me, and again, kind of fed into this idea of telling a story about, and it's this broader problem of how do you get people to play well with each other online, not just in a game, but even on Twitter or on Facebook. And people always underestimate how easy it is to sort of lay down the law and be strict and, come on, how do we get people to stop making threats? How do we get Donald Trump to behave on Twitter as if that were something you could just do? And so that kind of fit into it. And so I wanted to write a story about someone who was a kind of gold farmer, but then I hit on this idea of, well, what if it's like a full service thing where, yes, he'll sell you gold, but also he'll act as a guide to the game. And that was a useful character to have as my first-person protagonist too, because it gave me a way to explain things organically that didn't feel like I was just, interrupting the story to info dump. It's just, this is a guy he's an independent businessman who likes talking about his work while he's doing it. So.
Well, and I like the sense of, there's so many people out there who are creating their own jobs, who are finding a way to monetize something that they're good at, that maybe hasn't ever been called a job.
Right.
I'm a freelancer for multiple different industries, and I've had people say that. They're like, well, how did you do? Well, I just,
Yeah.
But his too is, he's monetized the Sherpa idea in a way that seems very benign, right? Like, he wants to make money, but he also just wants to show people around, and he's not trying to rob anybody, and he's not being those jerks.
Right.
But he is skirting the rules of this game, and that's where we get the title of the 88 names, because now,
Right.
How often do you think there are people out there still doing where they have multiple characters? Because that takes a lot of time, and that's kind of what he talks about with a couple other people too, is
yeah,
time it takes to build them.
I think a lot of people, I mean, when I was playing World of Warcraft, and like, you've got a choice of, I think at this point they're up to 10 or 11 different character classes. So I had one character in each class, and yeah, it takes a lot of time. It's most people probably, don't have time to do even the one game. It's like, so you'll pick one favorite game and spend your time on your leisure time on that. If you were doing this as a job, you'd probably still have to farm out a lot of the activity to other people and pay them just to level the characters up. Takes time. But yes, one of the ideas of the title is, yes, periodically they'll get caught by the customer, by what are called the EULA police, for the end user license agreement, which says, among other things, that you're not allowed to conduct unauthorized commercial activities within the game. You can't be a Sherpa. And so if they bust you, they'll ban that account. So you just switch to another account. And it's just like, grocery stores assume a certain number of pickle jars are going to get broken. So if you run a bookstore, there's going to be some shoplifting. There's no way you can avoid all of it. You just try to limit it. And so you just factor that in. And as long as you can make enough profit to cover your losses, then you can keep doing it. And that's true in the black market as well. So yes, he's got multiple accounts, and he's just got to keep ahead of it. And But it also obviously refers to the fact that by using this idea, because you can discard identities and pick up a new one online, it encourages people to engage in horrible behavior sometimes that they might not if that was going to be attached to them permanently. And so, as we have all seen on, on Twitter and other online forums. So,
yeah. Well, is there maybe a section did you want to read, or I could, if there was a one that you
I could read a little bit from the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
That first chapter is really, I found it very amusing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just read from the very opening of the book. So, the client is an idiot. His name is Brad Strong, and in real life, he works as a commodities trader at one of those big Wall Street banks that's always implicated but never held accountable whenever the economy crashes. According to his social media accounts, Brad is a graduate of the Wharton School of Finance. He owns a 1,900 square foot duplex in Soho and drives a Jaguar XP. He rock climbs and scuba dives and is a student of Krav Maga, the martial art practiced by Israeli commandos. Philosophically, he considers himself a libertarian, but he votes Republican because, let's be serious, he's a fan of the Three Stooges and early Chuck Palahniuk. He hates fat chicks, libtards, and people who won't shut up about their kids. Tonight, Brad is paying me and my associates at Sherpa Incorporated a substantial fee, substantial to us, trivial to him, to take him adventuring in the realms of Asgarth and Tempest's Call to Wizardry. Like the majority of clients, he has opted for a DPS character, a 200th level elf samurai. Brad thought about going with an orc ninja instead, but decided he'd rather not lurk in the shadows like a pussy. He wants to charge the monsters head on and crack some skulls. I'm tanking as a warrior troll named Blockhead of Moria. My job is to hold aggro, get the monsters to concentrate their attacks on me and my plate mail of invulnerability, while the DPS characters, Brad and my colleagues Jolene and Anya, do their damage per second thing, and Ray, running heals as a gnome cleric, staunches any bleeding that my armor can't prevent. It's a balancing act. The DPS need to finish off the monsters before the healer runs out of mana and everybody dies. But if they do too much damage too quickly, they'll steal aggro off the tank, and what should be an orderly killing spree will become a chaotic melee. This shouldn't be an issue. Jolene and Anya both know what they're doing, and Brad bought his character from us. The samurai has been carefully spec'd out to hit the sweet spot between too much damage and too little. The problem is the hammer. When Brad hired us 2 days ago, he asked if he could have access to his samurai in advance to get in some practice before the run. Since he was paying a quarter of our fee up front, I said yes. I guess I should have paid more attention to his comment about wanting to crack skulls. During practice, he decided he didn't like the katana his samurai was packing, so he went to the in-game auction house and bought himself a new weapon, Ivar's hammer. Ivar's hammer is basically Thor's hammer, without the Marvel trademark issues. Even by the high production standards of Call to Wizardry, it is a gorgeously rendered virtual object, a brutal, sexy work of art with black basilisk leather handle wraps, a dragon-tooth butt spike, and mithril filigree thunderbolts on the mallet head. You can see why an alpha male skullcracker would be drawn to it. Unfortunately, Ivar's hammer is a tanking weapon. Anything you hit with it gets really pissed off, and on critical hits, it shoots out fingers of lightning that aggro every other monster within 30 yards. Brad's samurai keeps getting mobbed, and unlike my plate armor, his scale mail can't handle that much punishment. Brad dies and Ray resurrects him. I warn Brad that this is going to keep happening if he insists on using his hammer. Brad doesn't want to hear it. As a paying customer, he feels he should be entitled to use any weapon he likes. I remind him that I'm only a guide to the game world. I don't make the rules. Figure something out, Brad says. We do what we can. I switch from Blockhead the Warrior to Surveillance, a paladin who can call down holy fire and throw his shield like Captain America, and who is generally better at emergency crowd control. Jolene's ranger summons a special companion animal, a fire-breathing tortoise that can serve as a secondary tank. When, despite my and Jolene's best efforts, Brad dies again and again, Ray revives him, and Anya, whose druid moonlights as an armor smith, patches the holes in his scale mail so we don't have to go back to town for repairs. Our contract with Brad guarantees him 2 full dungeon runs. Even the most difficult dungeons rarely take more than 3 or 4 hours to complete, and the Caverns of Malice, where we are now, ought to be a cakewalk. But the constant cycle of death and resurrection slows our progress to a crawl, An hour in, we've barely cleared the first boss. Brad is as frustrated as we are and not professionally constrained from showing it. As he gets more impatient, he starts charging into battle before the rest of us are ready, with predictable results. Jolene tries to calm Brad down, at which point we discover he doesn't particularly like black chicks either. Jolene shuts up and Anya takes over. Her attempt to soothe Brad is more successful, but the dying continues. I crank up the jib setting on my user interface, causing Brad's demises to be rendered in as gory a fashion as possible, blood and viscera exploding from his wounds. This has no practical effect on gameplay, but it makes me feel better. After another 40 minutes, we reach the second boss, the green dragon Anastasia. We stop outside her lair so I can explain the fight to Brad. There are 3 phases, I tell him. In phase 1, Anastasia will bite and claw. In phase 2, she'll vomit a river of acid. In phase 3, she'll beat her wings and conjure a storm of tornadoes. Then back to phase 1 and repeat until either she or all of us are dead. The rules of survival are straightforward. Don't steal aggro off the tank. Don't stand in the acid. Avoid the tornadoes. We also need to be mindful of Anastasia's eggs, which are stacked along the walls of her cavern. The eggs are sensitive to jostling, and if bumped or struck by lightning, they'll hatch. Anastasia's brood spit acid like their mom. They also poop little patches of crazy glue that make it much harder to dodge tornadoes. Hatch more than a handful of eggs, and the fight quickly becomes unwinnable. Having laid all this out, I asked Brad if he would please, just for this one battle, switch back to the katana. No, Brad says. It's getting harder not to lose my temper with this guy, and not just because of the way he's behaving. Call to Wizardry's avatar creation system maps your real face onto the skull of whatever mythical creature you're playing. Brad's spray-tanned mug, stretched over the angular physiognomy of an elf, produces an unfortunate suggestion of yellow face that is amplified by the samurai costume. I feel like I'm talking to the lead from an old-fashioned production of The Mikado, who is an idiot. I'm a professional with bills to pay, so I keep my cool, but I also keep pressing. The hammer just isn't going to work in here, I say. It'll break too many eggs and we'll be stuck on this boss all night. Brad tells me they can't switch back to the katana, okay? He doesn't have it anymore. He sold it to a vendor right before he bought Ivar's hammer. If I want to teleport back to town and buy him a new sword, fine. He'll use it for this one fight. Otherwise, I need to suck it up and deal. I really should buy him the replacement sword. It's the smart play. But I'm running out of patience and we've still got a long way to go, so I decide to brute force it instead. I look over at Jolene, who nods. Among the arrows in her quiver is a shaft of obliteration, the ranger equivalent of a tac nuke. The resources required to craft it cannot be purchased, but must be gathered tediously by hand, and generally its use is reserved for the deadliest end-level bosses. For Anastasia, it's complete overkill, but it should get us through the fight in the first try. Next, I B-channel Ray and slap a DNR order on Brad. No heals for him on this fight. Ray doesn't respond, but his expression tells me he'd already decided to cut Brad off. All right, I say, let's do this. Anastasia, curled in slumber at the center of her lair, blinks herself awake as we enter. I draw my sword and charge, but I don't rush to get to her first. As Brad cuts in front of me yelling, "Bonsai," I let him take lead. He runs up and bops Anastasia on the nose. Wide awake now, she rears her head back, roaring. The quality of the animation is incredible. The mix of rage and confusion on the dragon's face perfectly mimics the expression of someone startled out of sleep by a band of homicidal midgets. Her eyes flit from Brad to me and back again, and she cocks her head, suggesting a new level of bafflement. Why is the DPS in front? Do these morons not understand how this works? Brad raises Ivar's hammer for another blow, and Anastasia swipes him with a claw, shredding his armor and tearing out his ribcage. As his heart and lungs exit stage right, she bends down and bites his head off. What's left of Brad's body collapses into a pile of quivering giblets. The cavern flares white as Jolene's nuclear arrow finds its mark. I move in, hurling my shield and hacking with my sword. "Battle res me," Brad's disembodied voice cries. "Battle res me." We ignore him. While I hold aggro, Anya, her druid now shapeshifted into a mountain lion, comes in from the side and rakes Anastasia with her claws. Jolene's pet tortoise hits the other flank, and Jolene, staying behind me, looses arrow after arrow. In no time, Anastasia is caught up in her own bloody death throes. We never even make it to phase 3. As the dragon crashes to the ground, the vibrations from her fall cause all of her eggs to swell up and burst, harmlessly. For an instant, all is peaceful in the cavern. Res me, you fucks, Brad shouts. Ray's already doing it. I'm sure he's tempted not to, but like me, he wants to get paid. Brad doesn't appreciate Ray's professionalism. His body reassembled, he leaps to his feet, shouting, "The fuck," and darts at Ray with Ivar's hammer swinging. But the game won't let you attack your teammates, or shove them. When Brad tries to chest bump Ray, he passes right through him. Brad, I say. I point to the treasure chest that's taken the place of Anastasia's corpse, its purple aura signifying epic loot. Still fuming, Brad stomps over to the chest and kicks it, which is allowed. The lid pops open, unleashing rays of gold-orange light. A trumpet flourish sounds. Not just epic loot then, legendary loot. Brad's won the lottery. I step up to get a better look, and my heart sinks as I see the sword hilt rising out of the chest. The Vorpal blade of Gilliam, another tanking weapon. And not just any tanking weapon. For a paladin, the Vorpal blade of Gilliam is the tanking weapon. It is as rare as it is powerful. You could open 1,000 loot chests and not find another. And like all legendary weapons, it's bind on pickup, so you'll never see one for sale in the auction house. Most Sherpa contracts specify that clients are only entitled to loot their characters can reasonably use. No tanking weapons for non-tanks, no DPS weapons for healers, etc. But clients of Sherpa Incorporated are entitled to any and all loot without exception. That way they never feel cheated by the rules, and if they choose to pass up loot voluntarily, they get to feel virtuous and altruistic. Brad's no altruist, but he stares for so long at the sword without taking it that I foolishly allow myself to hope he doesn't want it. Then he glances over at me. I've got my best poker face on, but Brad's Wall Street trader instincts see right through it. He grins and turns back to the chest. Brad ditches Ivar's hammer, which falls ringing to the floor and vanishes back into his inventory. His hand closes around the Vorpal blade's hilt, and another trumpet flourish signals that it is now bound to him irrevocably. The sword blade is a length of razor-sharp crystal filled with changeable light. When Brad first holds it up, it's white with holy fire, but as he waves it back and forth, it turns brimstone red, noxious green, icy blue, and finally dark purple shot through with violet sparks. My despair deepens as I realize I'm never going to be able to hold aggro against this thing. And Brad was talking about going to Crimson Castle for his second dungeon run. Vampires and succubi, a crowd control nightmare. Chunk. The cavern suddenly brightens as if Jolene set off another nuke. I turn and shield my eyes against the bank of Klieg lights that have appeared up near the ceiling. A second bank comes on beside them, and then a third. I'm reminded of my only visit to a real-world amusement park on a field trip when I was 9. A friend and I snuck away from the group and went on the haunted house ride, which proceeded to break down, stranding us in the middle of a ghoul-infested graveyard. We screamed our heads off until the ride operator came to rescue us, emergency lights exposing the ghouls as nothing more than puppets on a stage. These Klieg lights have a similar effect, albeit one that is entirely computer-generated. In the blink of an eye, Anastasia's lair transforms from a photorealistic cave to a cheap set constructed of wood and paper mache. The 3D treasure chest becomes a painted flat, propped up with a plank. What the hell is going on, says Brad, his legendary Vorpal blade demoted to a styrofoam toy. What's going on is we're about to get busted by the EULA police. I should be upset about this, and I am, but I can't help being impressed as well. Any other game company, having caught us violating their terms of service, would just dump us out of the system, but not Tempest. Even when they ban you, they turn it into a show. And it's this extraordinary level of polish that has made Call to Wizardry the most successful MMORPG in history. A section of the cavern wall swings open, revealing a concrete maintenance tunnel. 2 men in suits emerge. At first glance, they read as lawyers, but then you notice the gloves they are wearing, blue latex, like the kind police use when handling evidence. The gloves are an inside joke, a reference to a cult science fiction show that aired before I was born and was canceled after only 1 season. I'm a big enough nerd that I get it. The EULA cops aren't here to haul us off to virtual jail. They're executioners. Brad thinks he can fight them with his Nerf sword. He manages a few halting steps before the movement controls on his user interface stop working. 2 by 2, hands of blue, the EULA cops advance to the center of the room. We find ourselves drawn into a semicircle before them. EULA cop number 1 consults a computer tablet and addresses us one at a time, starting with me. John Chu alias 8437@gmail.com, aka Blockhead of Moria, aka Surveillance. You are guilty of violating Section 5 of the Call to Wizardry End User License Agreement. Section 5 of the EULA prohibits unsanctioned commercial activities within the game world, i.e. it's the anti-sherpa clause. Jolene, Anya, and Ray are all guilty of this offense as well, as is Brad for hiring us. Interestingly, Brad is also guilty of violating Section 2, which prohibits hacking into other players' accounts or profiting from said hacking. The penalty for these crimes is the immediate and permanent suspension of the offending user accounts, the EULA cop concludes. If you believe this judgment has been reached in error, you may appeal to customer service within 60 days. With that, he turns to his counterpart. EULA cop number 2 extends a gloved fist clutching a small cylindrical device. Translucent blue antennae sprout from both ends of it. They emit a harsh buzzing noise that jangles the nerves like fingernails scraping on a blackboard. I can't move, but from where I'm standing, I can see Brad at the far end of the semicircle. Blood starts drizzling from his samurai's nose and ears. The buzzing gets louder and the drizzle becomes a gusher. I experience a brief moment of satisfaction as Brad's head explodes. Then it's happening to me, too. Everything goes black. Words appear, floating in the void. Account terminated. Rest in peace, Blockhead of Moria. Rest in peace, Surveillance. I'm down to 88 names.
I just love that when the cops show up, it's almost like you're on a soundstage. Like and so that's where you almost can't tell, is it really happening?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they in VR? Like that was really interesting. Like I said, when I first started reading it, some of the terms I was like, I know some of these, but not all of them. But then it goes well enough that you're like, I still completely know what's going on. Like I can kind of still see it, on the screen or, yeah. So thank you for reading that whole part.
And for those who are wondering, there is a, John Chu conveniently includes a user's glossary at the back of the book. So, hopefully you won't need it, but if you do find yourself lost at any point while you are reading, you can flip quickly to the appendix and it's like, oh, DPS, damage per second, that's right, that's what that means. So.
Well, and the parts at the beginning of each chapter too that help explain what a Sherpa is, and that's from somebody like the Lady Ada's Lexicon, which I'm sure is like either a website or someone else who's in gaming.
Right. Well, yeah, that was the other thing too. Was every chapter has an epigraph that's basically a quote from either the Lady Ada's Lexicon or there's a New Devil's Dictionary that sort of got snarky definitions of certain terms. So and that was a way of letting people know important things, but also commenting on what was going on. So
but so many of these are applicable and have been for a while. I just randomly flipped to page, I guess it's page 49, the definition of a meet cute, which we all know. I mean, that's a fairly common, and
although there are people who don't know what that is, actually.
Right. But I appreciate that it's a scene in a romantic comedy where a couple meet, and what's really funny is none of that happens in real life. Like the meet that you see in romantic comedies are so unrealistic. And so I think it helps play into your book of what is real and what isn't. So I think let's go ahead and open it up to our attendees. Does anyone have questions? Let me know if you don't know how to unmute yourself on Zoom and I can do it, but does anyone have questions for Matt?
By the way, I recognize Ed Hall and my friend Charlie from Germany. Hello.
Nice, thank you.
Hi.
Hey, Matt, good to see you.
Good to see you. So welcome to the future.
Or the all too present.
Yeah.
So
what can I tell you?
Well, it looks like Susan might have a question. I see a hand.
Hi, Susan.
Yeah.
Hi. In my other life, I was a bookstore event coordinator, so I always have a question ready.
In the before time.
I read this book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, but I always think that about all of your books. So
thank you.
What a pleasure to be able to chat with you today. You have a character in this book. I don't want to get into spoilers, but you have a character in this book who is essentially a spook. And in a more conventional story, 9 times out of 10, that character is male. In your book, that character is female.
I don't think it's too much of a giveaway that yes, John Chu's mother she works for an organization called Zero Day. She's a naval officer who now works for a branch of Cyber Command, which is a real organization, and Zero Day, which is an imaginary subgroup of that investigates online crime and engages in cyber warfare. So yeah, he's able to go to her for help, and So yes, yes, she is a woman and she is Asian.
So I guess my question is, do you deliberately try, like actively, to subvert the expected in some of the choices you make about these characters? Or does it just come about organically through the storytelling?
I don't know that I would necessarily call it subversion. I get bored with doing things the same way everybody always does them. And it's interesting to me to do things differently and see, does that change anything? Where does it go? So it's not about, I don't know, subversion always feels to me like a political move, and it's not about politics. It's about, there's all this space that people have not played with yet, and I want to go there and see, so even if I'm doing something that's been done a million times in one sense, let me see if I can do something fresh with it. And the other thing is just in my house, if one of my parents was going to be a spy, it would be my mom. It wouldn't have been my dad. So, so I think that was the other motivation behind it. Is like, yeah, my mother is the one that you would call at 3 a.m. if you were in jail in another state or something. She would get in the car and blow the wall off the back of the jail to save you. And, so yeah, that just to me seemed natural that it would be John Chu's mother who would be the spy, not his dad. So.
Matt, I see a lot of what looks like games on the shelf behind you.
Yes.
Wow, yeah, a lot of games. Looks like the back of my office closet. Have you done any game design?
I've done like a little bit of stuff along the way. I mean, when I was 12 years old, I was a playtester for Simulations Publications Incorporated, which was it's a long defunct, it was a war game company based in Manhattan. And so Friday nights they would have open playtests, and you would go in and read the rules to whatever prototypes they were working on, and then sit down and play until late in the night. And the idea would be to find out what works, what doesn't. Are there any strategies that break the game? And as you can kind of guess from their title, they were mostly into very realistic war games with titles like NATO Division Commander or Jutland or whatever. And but they also did some science fiction fantasy titles, and those are the ones I would typically be drawn to, particularly as a 12-year-old. So the first game I ever worked on was something called The Creature That Ate Sheboygan, which simulated a fight between Godzilla, they didn't call him Godzilla, but basically a fight between Godzilla and the Wisconsin National Guard. And to give an example of what you would do as a playtester, one of the things I discovered the first night I played, I took the Godzilla role, and you got a certain number of points to pick special abilities for your giant monster. And I figured out that if you gave the monster fire breathing and then evasion abilities, like the ability to leap over buildings, instead of fighting the National Guard, you could just run around the map setting fire to all the buildings, and you got victory points for property damage. So by doing that, you could avoid combat, and you would always win because you would just be able to outflank the tanks and the helicopters, and if they corner you, you just jump over the buildings and keep going. So they ended up changing the fire rules a little bit to make it a little more difficult to do that. So that was the kind of thing you would do as a playtester, was, are there any degenerate strategies that you can use? And this has served me well over the years, and like, this is a problem that you see in online gaming as well. So I don't think I've designed any particular games from scratch. Like, I did a couple of things when I was working at SBI, but I think I'm better in that and critiquing other people's designs than I am at doing stuff from the ground up. And part of it is that I was an only child, so when I played games, it was really, I would play solitaire, and so it was more almost a narrative form of play where there were no surprises. I knew what everybody was going to do, so it was more like telling a story with the game pieces than actually a contest. And that holds even today. I'm not very good at playing against other people because they behave unpredictably, but it kind of in a weird way was practice for what I actually do, which is tell stories. So, but yeah, that has sort of been that was my initial exposure to game design. And SPI was also my first exposure to computer games. They had what at the time was called a mini computer, which meant it was smaller than the size of a full room. It was a computer the size of a desk that they would use to crunch numbers for surveys. But you could also play this very primitive text-based Star Trek game on it. And I just fell in love with that. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And so from then on, I was pretty much hooked on computer gaming as well. So that was all sort of led over many years to this book, I guess.
Cool. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Charlie. Or Katrin, actually.
Yeah, finally, my real name. So I've enjoyed listening to the podcast that went along with the book. It was very informative. I loved the interviews. And I was just wondering if you now caught the podcasting bug, or whether you thought about turning your next idea into a scripted podcast. So any thoughts on that?
I think the main thing about it is I discovered I enjoyed it more, and I'm less nervous about talking online than I probably was beforehand. It's just you sort of have to get over that very quickly. And hosting or co-hosting is certainly easier in some ways, that you don't have to, you basically just come up with good questions and let them do the talking. So yeah, it was entertaining. I don't know that I would do it regularly because I'm still basically a really introverted person. Like I can fake being an extrovert, and my co-host, Blake Colley, and I were talking about this. He's the same way. Like he can pretend to be an extrovert for a little while, but then he's got to go and be alone for a long while before he's ready to talk to people again. So I don't know that I would want to do it regularly, but it's been an interesting thing, and it's certainly been nice, particularly now that we're all trapped indoors without even wanting to be. And by the way, yeah, I should mention this for other people who aren't aware. There is we did do a podcast that you can, if you go to my website, www.bymattruff.com, there's a link to the site, and it's me and a reviewer named Blake Collier, and we talked to a variety of different people who work in the virtual reality field. I think the first interview was with the guy Brandon Oldenburg, who's an Academy Award-winning director and filmmaker, and he's now doing really interesting virtual reality experiences, and including one called War Remains, which it's actually this. When people were allowed to go outside, it was this installation where you would basically put on goggles and a pack and stuff, but you're also walking through a physical environment. So it's controlling what you see and hear, but you're also feeling things. So if you see, you can reach out and touch barbed wire. It's a World War I flashback, and you can walk through and you feel the trench under your feet, and so it's just a really fascinating thing where you can experience as much as is possible for a modern person what it was like to be in the trenches in 1917. So and they've now got a home version that you can experience on Oculus, although that's probably not quite as overwhelming as the physical installation. And then we also talked to tech people who are designing the technology for that, and we talked to Cory Doctorow, my friend, another novelist who's written a lot of stuff like this, and he wrote a book called oh gosh, no, I'm spacing the name of it, but For the Win, which is, his is also about gold farmers, but he's writing about, his is about gold farmers in China, whereas John Chu is more of like the American model of gold farming or being a Sherpa, where it's more of it's like a freelance job that, someone who maybe went to college and realized they didn't get a real job, so this is the kind of thing you do for extra money. In China, it's really more like sweatshop work, where you'll have a dozen or 2 dozen guys sitting in an internet cafe, and they are working for someone else who actually owns the accounts they're using to generate money. So Corey's novel is about these guys trying to unionize and then trying to create like an online labor union that you can take, that migrant workers can take with them, not just from city to city, but from country to country, and that they will all sort of back each other up. So it's just a really interesting idea, and we talk about whether that's realistic or not in the podcast. So he calls them the Webblies as opposed to the Wobblies. So yeah, it was an interesting thing, and it was the conversation. I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know about the potential for the technology. Like, I think one of the most eye-opening conversations was with a guy named Noah Nelson, and he runs a website called No Proscenium, which is devoted to immersive entertainment generally, but particularly immersive theater, which are theatrical performances that basically try to erase the distinction between the audience and the actors. So you have plays where you're actually walking around from scene to scene, interacting with the actors. And that's another thing that the pandemic has completely shut down. So they're trying to figure out how to take that online now. But talking to him, just the stuff that I didn't even think of as virtual reality, like escape rooms or, those haunted houses that they do around Halloween, but that's kind of true too. It's a kind of virtual reality, except it's not virtual. It's just, it's a sort of play acting thing. So it's just been a really interesting experience talking to people. And that was the part that I really liked about it, was that, again, as I say, I'm very introverted, but when I force myself to go out and talk to people, particularly people who I, have different experiences than me, I often learn quite a bit, and that gives me a lot more stuff to think about what to work on next. So, yeah, in terms of what I'm going to work on next, I'm sort of thinking more about going back to Lovecraft country. I still really want to write more in that universe, and if I'm ever going to do it, I think it's going to have to be now, because the series is coming out in about 2 months. So I want to try to do more with that, and then, if we'll see where that goes, and if, either I'll do it or I'll try it and finally give up on the idea, and then do something else. But that's going to be my immediate next thing, and then I've got some other ideas percolating if that doesn't work out. So.
And where did you say Lovecraft Country was going to be on? What channel?
HBO.
Oh, so it's like the new HBO Max, like the subscription.
Yeah, it's they finished filming in January, just in time.
Wow.
And they've been able to continue the visual effects work even with the pandemic. So, and they haven't announced an exact air date, but they dropped a trailer now, and it's definitely coming out in August.
That's so exciting.
And yeah, I mean, it's ghoulish, but it will probably benefit somewhat from the fact that there's not going to be a lot of competition now, because a lot of other shows, I think, got caught by, you can't do filming at the moment. I think, like my wife was telling me, Tyler Perry has been trying to figure out a way to isolate an entire cast, like bring them in, quarantine them, test everybody every day, and then film, in a closed set for however long it takes. And you can do that with certain kinds of dramas, but it's going to be a while before you can do an Avengers style, multi-continent epic again, I think. So it's going to be interesting to see in response to the pandemic how it affects the kind of entertainment that people can stage in the next couple of years, I think.
I wonder if we'll see, not only podcasts, but more like what she was asking, the scripted, like back to Orson Welles and War of the Worlds, where we're going to tune in on our radio or our, apps on our phones to listen to a story as opposed to watch it.
I mean, it's funny. I've been doing a lot more podcast listening in the last few months than I had before. I mean, part of that was just I kind of wanted to get a sense of what other people were doing, so I would kind of know what I was doing. But it's actually a really entertaining form if you find people who are interesting to listen to. And that's, of course, that's the trick, is that a lot of podcasts are just not that interesting, and you figure that out really quickly. So it's a pleasure when you find one that you like, and particularly one that's been going on a long time, so you can then go back and listen to their full catalog rather than, so if something's been going on for 10 years or, 5 years, that's great. So yeah, we probably are going to see and a lot more innovation, and there will be, this was the thing that most of the podcasts for 88 Names were recorded before the pandemic became a thing, but we did do a follow-up series of questions to some of the people we talked to talk about how they were coping with this, and how they thought it was going to affect the future of virtual reality technology. And I did a book club in Second Life, which is another online community, and I think I don't know if it was the CEO or one of the top guys showed up at this towards the end during the Q&A part of towards the end of the book club discussion, and he was saying that a lot of different groups were contacting Second Life to set up, basically having them create real estate for these people to do online meeting, face-to-face meetings, only except it's not face-to-face, you're wearing an avatar. It's so, but all kinds of groups as a way of holding group meetings and stuff like that. And obviously Zoom has taken off, although not everybody loves it.
Yeah.
But, so I think that, there's going to be a lot more of that. And it's also going to expose a lot more people to the existing technology and also to the shortcomings in the existing technology. And I think a lot of folks with time on their hands are going to be thinking, well, okay, we need to improve this, we need to improve this, not just as an antidote to the pandemic, but because this is a pretty cool technology that could be amazing if we just make it this much better. So so it'll be neat.
Well, and honestly, your book is, it's a book. So what I'm hoping is we're going to see some, maybe publishing is suffering a little bit right now, but maybe we'll see an uptick in people getting back to reading physical books again. I know
I've heard rumors that people are actually reading during the pandemic. Yeah.
So much more in the last 2 months. And this is sad from an event planner, but because I don't have a lot of time to still read outside of my other jobs. I've really appreciated that I've been able to read everybody's book before events now because I have more time. So I'm hoping that means that, little indie bookstores like my own, and you've got some great ones up there in Seattle, are going to keep thriving in a way that we need them to. So.
And I got to say, logistically, one of the things that fascinated me about VR, and I think that the most interesting experience I had, I did a thing in Sansar, which is a sort of the actual 3D virtual reality version of Second Life, where I was interviewed by a guy in Germany, and I was wearing an avatar, so I looked like, because one of my novels is Bad Monkeys, and so I was basically a bipedal mandrill wearing a jean jacket. But what was interesting about it is that this, we're in this virtual space together. It really does feel like you're in a room with somebody on another continent. And, there were copies of my books lying all over the room. So you can, and it just made me realize that one of the things that lets you do is bring people together from, all over the world on really very short notice with none of the logistical hassles at convening a real world international meeting. And the idea of, in the not very far future, being able to hold a book club in a scene from the book with the people coming as as their favorite character. That, and again, that's something that you don't need to be shut indoors for that to be kind of a cool idea. And I will always love being able to go and visit bookstores in person, but there is something to be said for, let me skip the travel hassle, let me skip, trying to figure out where my hotel is, let me just sit down and, again, we had plenty of advance notice for this meeting, but if you wanted to, you could throw an author event, a couple of hours advance notice if you wanted to. All you need to do is, throw up a sign and say, hey, are you free tonight? You want to come by the store from, your house 1,000 miles away and talk to some people? And you could say, sure.
Yeah. I'm hoping that will open up some, because obviously where we are here in Oregon, Bend is pretty small, and it's still 3 hours from Portland, but I love that you're 6 hours away, but this is good for everybody's schedule. So, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't have to get on a plane, which I would have because I don't drive. So the only way I get to Bend is by hopping on a small plane, which I don't really want to do probably until there's a vaccine.
Agreed. Well, I want to thank everyone who took the time to join us on this Sunday afternoon. I appreciate it so much. Don't forget, you can shop at Roundabout Books through our website, 24/7. It's roundaboutbookshop.com. We're in beautiful Bend, Oregon. And if you have already gotten this book, but you're looking for his other books, please let us know. And hopefully someday in the near future, we will get to see you, live and in person. But thank you again so much for taking the time on a Sunday afternoon.
Thank you very much.
To be with us. Yeah, thank you again, everybody, for joining.
Good to see you, Ed. Good to see you, Charlotte. Good to see you, Susan. And Jeff, if you're there.
Yeah. So I think with that, we'll bid adieu. This will be up on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it again later, or if you had friends that couldn't make it, please let them know. Roundabout Books has a YouTube channel. So I think, unless anyone had any other questions.
And if anybody does, yeah, Ed, you do.
Hold on, I'm going to unmute you.
Oh.
There we go. Wait.
Hey, Matt?
Yep.
Did you get to visit the set of Lovecraft Country at all?
Oh yeah, I did a couple times. My wife and I went to see the filming of the pilot, and my wife and I got to see it down in Georgia. Yeah, that was amazing.
So cool. That's like, I literally passed some PA's car with a Lovecraft Country thing hanging. I live in Atlanta.
Oh,
remember?
Wow.
So yeah.
Oh, I should have remembered that. I would have, yeah, we would have tried to hook up with you while we were down there. But yeah, it was an amazing thing. I mean, it's a weird Sorcerer's Apprentice feeling of like, oh my gosh, there's like 700 people here working on this thing, and this is all because of this weird story I thought up in my little room at home. So
were you like in town, or was it a rural? Was it just outside Atlanta? Do you remember?
They have a studio in the outskirts. It's like I think it's like 20 or 30 miles outside the city core.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's quite something. But just the number of people working on it, and like they've got one building, it's just the fleet of 50s era cars, and the machine shop and stuff, and then costumes, and like just some of the jobs. There's one guy, his whole job is basically wearing stuff, like taking the clothes and making it look like it's not just fresh out of a store, but running it through the washing machine however many times to make it look like they've been wearing it. So that's like, yeah, it's something. And everyone was really, really nice too. So yeah, so yes, I did get to see that. That was amazing. And I'm glad we got to do that before, in the before time.
Yeah. Well,
It's gonna be so cool.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
I mean, in the book there are some out-of-world descriptions where your own mind really struggles to imagine it. I'm so interested in how they will manage to put that on a screen.
Well, that was the thing. One of the people we had a great time was Kalina Ivanov is the production designer. She's the gal who's in charge of all of the sets, and it was from her. Like I basically can't talk about any of the stuff I learned there, but just like from her, we got the sense of how they'd taken the story in the book and expanded on it and made it even bigger and more amazing. Like there's even more stuff in the series than there is in the novel, and it's just, I think it's going to be incredible. So, and there was this thing, the HBO executives, where they say, oh, this is like nothing I've seen on television before, and like you hear that and you're like, they would say that anyway. But then now that I've been there and seen what they're planning, I'm like, yeah, actually that's kind of true. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the final product, because it really isn't going to be like anything that anyone's seen before. So it's going to be amazing. And I am so glad that they're being able to finish it. So yeah, 2 more months.
Yeah, something definitely to look forward to. So, all right. Well, I think that about wraps it up.
Yep. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.